Hello and welcome to BYJU'S IAS. Let's take up the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper by looking at an editorial from page number 6 of the Delhi edition. This article deals with the centre's latest outreach towards Jammu and Kashmir. Recently, the central government has extended a political outreach towards Jammu and Kashmir to address the hurt feelings of the people of Jammu and Kashmir and the regional political parties following certain decisions of the centre that were taken in 2019. See, on the 24th of June, Prime Minister Narendra Modi is set to meet with around 14 leaders of various political parties, especially regional parties of J&K, to initiate a new political dialogue and a political process to determine the future of Jammu and Kashmir. This latest political outreach by the centre comes nearly 2 years after it altered the constitutional and political status of J&K. In 2019, the centre decided to revoke the special status that was given to Jammu and Kashmir under Article 370 and Article 35A, and along with this, the centre also decided to reorganize the state of Jammu and Kashmir into two union territories. This was the first time that a full-fledged state was being downgraded to two union territories, that is the Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir and the Union Territory of Ladakh. To enforce these decisions and constitutional changes, the centre implemented several controversial measures, including placing J&K under prolonged periods of lockdown, followed by the arrests of several political leaders, including from mainstream parties, along with the suspension of basic fundamental rights of the people of the region, including the right to free press, right to communication, and as well as right to movement, all of which have been guaranteed under Article 19 of the Indian Constitution. These harsh measures were put in place along with the suspension of internet for months together in anticipation of violence and backlash against these decisions of the centre. The centre justified these decisions on the grounds that they were needed to fully integrate J&K with India and to provide for further economic development in Jammu and Kashmir. But these unilateral decisions of the centre, without consulting the people of Jammu and Kashmir and the local parties, led to a feeling of betrayal amongst the people of J&K, and as well as the manner in which it was implemented and the suspension of these rights, led to criticism both within India and as well as from abroad. Since then, J&K came directly under the centre's administration as a union territory, and only after several months, these restrictions were relaxed, including the restoration of internet connectivity and the release of political leaders and political activists. But apart from this, there had been no outreach from the centre to address these hurt feelings. But now, nearly 2 years later, the Prime Minister himself has shown the flexibility that was needed, and he has called for a multi-party political dialogue involving regional political parties and leaders to initiate a new political process through which the centre is hoping to hold direct discussions with the regional parties and the local leaders. As a part of this political dialogue, the centre has invited around 14 parties, including several national level opposition parties, and the centre is hoping to work out a way forward which could lead to the establishment of normalcy in Jammu and Kashmir. But one cannot hope for a quick resolution of these issues, as the centre is yet to address the trust deficit that it created with regional parties through its unilateral decisions. Over the last few years, the centre has shown unwillingness to engage with even mainstream political parties of J&K, such as the National Conference and the PDP. Yes, now the centre is showing willingness to open up to these parties and hold consultations with them, but it would be very important to rebuild the lost trust and to address the feelings of betrayal following the unilateral decisions of the centre. The editorial appreciates the Government of India and the Prime Minister for initiating this new outreach towards J&K and calls it a wise decision by keeping in mind not just internal political harmony in the country, but also by keeping in mind the changing geopolitics of the region. See, inevitably, the Kashmir question and the Kashmir dispute is linked to regional geopolitics. The Kashmir dispute will continue to remain a bilateral dispute between India and Pakistan, and the geopolitical developments of the region is going to have a significant impact on India's decisions as well. In fact, this new political outreach of India could have been triggered by these changing geopolitical developments. Because in neighboring Afghanistan, the United States is pulling out its troops. And as we have studied in various sessions, the conflict in Afghanistan is inevitably linked to the dispute in Kashmir. Pakistan, which has used the Kashmir conflict to destabilize India, has waged a covert proxy war against India by using Afghan soil. Since the late 1980s, Pakistan created a direct link between extremism along the Afghanistan-Pakistan border and insurgency in J&K. So the developments in Afghanistan would inevitably have a direct impact on the future of violence and stability in J&K. So as American troops pull out, and as the return of Taliban to power looks inevitable, India is seen to be re-strategizing its options as far as Kashmir is concerned. While on one hand, we are exploring the option of reaching out to the Taliban directly, on the other hand, India would look to extend an outreach internally in J&K by reaching out to the regional parties in order to restore normalcy in Jammu and Kashmir. Then parallelly, we have the India-China border standoff, which has been going on since last year. And despite several rounds of talks and negotiations, the disengagement along the borders has still not happened. And this ongoing border standoff along the line of actual control will obviously have a direct impact on the stability of Jammu and Kashmir as well. Then upon this, Western countries, especially US and West European countries, they have started closely observing India's Kashmir policy since 2019. And on many instances, their lawmakers and their institutions, they have criticized India's approach, especially the manner in which Article 370 was suspended and the manner in which basic political and fundamental rights were suspended for months together. Back in 2019, there wasn't much pressure from the US government at least, as the Donald Trump administration had refused to directly interfere in the J&K issue. The US government under Donald Trump was treating the J&K issue as purely an internal matter of India, but now things seem to have changed a little under the Biden administration because the Biden administration has publicly spoken about India's Kashmir policy, and it has been seen to be publicly disproving India's policy towards Kashmir. Then upon this, we have Pakistan, which has been desperately trying to reclaim the lost strategic space as far as the Kashmir conflict is concerned. And Pakistan would be waiting for an opportunity to exploit the situation in Kashmir once the US troops pull out of Afghanistan. So keeping these complex internal and external factors in mind, the government of India has taken a wise decision to reach out to J&K, especially to various political parties, including the regional parties. And the editorial hopes that the center holds discussions with all the political players by keeping an open mind and in good faith so that a suitable way forward can be worked out by keeping in mind not just Indian interests of territorial integrity and sovereignty, but also by keeping in mind the interests of the people of Jammu and Kashmir. That is with regard to the welfare of the region and as well as with regard to the basic rights of the Kashmiris. The editorial points out that the new political outreach by the Prime Minister has the potential of achieving this, provided the center approaches these talks with an open mind. Now let's take up a column from page number 6, which evaluates the trilateral dynamics between India, China, and Russia. See, of late, Russia's stand on the India-China tensions has been causing a lot of concern for India. Because of late, India has observed that Russia has started supporting China's global vision, which is based on its desire to dominate the world through its aggressive rise. This changing stand of Russia towards the India-China standoff became very clear when recently Russian President Vladimir Putin pointed out that the Indian Prime Minister and the Chinese President are responsible enough to resolve their mutual issues between their countries, while he clearly undermined the role for any extra-regional power from interfering with or influencing the India-China standoff. This was an indirect reference of the Russian president towards the quadrilateral grouping. Russia has clearly denounced the Quad, which is an informal grouping consisting of India, US, Japan, and Australia. This informal diplomatic grouping has championed the Indo-Pacific doctrine with the objective of establishing a rules-based order in order to maintain a free and open Indo-Pacific. This objective of the Quad or the quadrilateral is said to be aimed towards China's aggression which is being increasingly seen in the Indo-Pacific region. Be it China's military aggression in the South China Sea, or be it its border standoff with India. Across the Indo-Pacific, China's military and diplomatic aggression is on the rise, and in many instances, China is seen to be openly violating international laws and the rules-based world order. It is in this context that the quadrilateral grouping was formed and started gaining prominence because the objective of the Quad countries was to enforce the rules-based order in the Indo-Pacific. While India doesn't necessarily see the Quad as a containment strategy against China, it does envision the Quad as a right platform to exert pressure on China and to counterbalance China's aggression, which is directly affecting and compromising Indian interests in the region. But since India and Russia share historically close diplomatic relations, India was expecting some kind of Russian support that would criticize China's aggressive behavior as it is on the rise to being a global power. But contrary to these expectations of India, Russia has become increasingly accepting of China's rise, and it has often ignored China's display of aggression, even against countries like India. And now, Russia not only expects India and China to resolve their border issues, but it has also clearly denounced the role of any grouping such as the quadrilateral, because Russia views the quadrilateral as an entirely US construct. It sees the Quad as a US initiative to contain China and as well as Russia. Hence, it's very interesting to note that it was not just China but even Russia which have referred to the quadrilateral grouping as the Asian NATO. Since the last couple of years, China has denounced the Quad by referring to it as the Asian NATO because China perceives the Quad as a US initiative which is designed to be a military alliance designed to contain and corner China in the region. Now, Russia as well has come to increasingly accept this stand of China, and it has even started to referring the Quad as the Asian NATO. So this stand of Russia against the quadrilateral and its clear denouncement of India's involvement in the Quad and its lack of interest to defend India against rising Chinese aggression has caused a great deal of concern for India because right now India looks at the quadrilateral as an absolute necessity to counterbalance Chinese aggression, and the lack of any direct support from Russia in this regard has been discouraging for India. This is an indication of the changing geopolitics of the world, where India is increasingly being seen to be moving westwards, whereas Russia and China are entering into a closer embrace. This inevitably pushes India and Russia against each other, despite having shared decades of close strategic relations. See, during the Cold War, the former Soviet Union was India's closest ally, especially after the 1971 war, when the US openly threatened India on behalf of Pakistan during the liberation of Bangladesh war. India abandoned its non-aligned principle and sought support from the Soviet Union. Since then, Soviet Union became India's closest strategic partner and as well as the most important defense partner for India. On all major global issues, and as well as with regard to India's security interests, the Soviet Union was India's closest friend. But this dynamic came to an end and underwent a major change following the end of the Cold War in 1991. As the Soviet Union collapsed, India realized that Russia was not the same power as the Soviet Union. Even though Russia continued to be a close friend of India, especially in the defense and strategic domain, India started looking out for other countries and it started realigning its economic and strategic interests. This was a critical need for India because with the collapse of the Soviet Union, India had lost a key partner and it was absolutely essential for India to diversify its diplomatic and defense relations. Meanwhile, Russia tried to form a trilateral alliance involving India and China known as the RIC Trilateral. This was a Russian initiative to counterbalance the West in a post-Cold War era, but this RIC initiative never really took off, primarily due to tensions between India and China. China was always dismissive of India's global power ambitions, and China always doubted Indian capabilities, especially in countering the West. Upon this, frequent disputes between them, along with border clashes and tensions, led to serious divergences within the RIC. In the initial years, while Russia was seen to be balancing the tensions and rivalry between India and China. Of late, Russia has abandoned this, and on several instances, Russia has been seen to be siding with China, even at the cost of affecting its ties with India. This paradigm shift in geopolitics that we have witnessed over the last few decades is a direct result of the growing rivalry between Russia and the US. As India has leaned westwards, particularly on the United States, Russia has started to align more with China and as well as with Pakistan. While India has sought to strike the middle path between Russia and US, Russia hasn't been kind enough to acknowledge India's need to build stronger relations with US, Australia, Japan, and France as a counterbalance against China. So these divergent perspectives of India and Russia over China's aggression makes multilateral platforms such as the RIC Trilateral and BRICS irrelevant. And this naturally pushes India to seek out support from the Western countries through groupings such as the Quadrilateral. While China has strongly resisted the Quad, even Russia has its reasons to be opposed to the Quad. And this is what has brought Russia and China into a closer alignment. And Russia has been doing this at the cost of affecting its ties with India. Because in Russia's perspective right now, India is a country which has been aligned with the West, and Russia perceives India to be embracing groupings such as the Quad, which are US-led initiatives. The writer points out that this is where the Russian leadership and the strategic establishment has been making a mistake. While it is true that India has moved increasingly westwards post the end of the Cold War, Russia needs to acknowledge that India has always been striking the middle path when it comes to tensions between Russia and the US. But Russia's negative perception of the West, led by the United States and the Quadrilateral, has led Russia to increasingly distance itself from India. And along with this, the declining defense trade between India and Russia, accompanied by the parallel rise in India's defense relations with Israel, France, and the US, has led Russia to conclude that India has not only moved away strategically from Russia, but also economically. This is where the writer calls upon Russia to carry out a reassessment of its strategy and to carefully read China's true intentions. While China's rise as a global power is welcome, its unilateral and unnecessarily aggressive behavior has been stamping on the interests of other countries such as India. So the writer calls upon Russia to acknowledge this and recognize India's need to swing westwards while maintaining its relations with Russia. Now let's look at a column from page number 7, written by a former IGP of the CRPF. In this column, he stresses the importance of a dress code for police and security forces and how it helps in maintaining decorum and discipline within the security forces. He says that the way in which police and security forces dress and the way in which they conduct and behave themselves plays a direct role in determining the image of the force and as well as in determining its efficiency and professionalism. He writes this column in the context of a latest order issued by the director of CBI, in which the newly appointed director has sent out an instruction to all CBI officials to dress formally henceforth by placing a complete ban on casual clothing within the CBI. This means that within the CBI, all male officers would be required to wear collared shirts and formal trousers and shoes, and women officers would be required to wear either a sari or suits or formal shirts and trousers. The writer points out that until recently, there was no need for such separate orders to be issued with regard to dressing because officers were trained to dress formally to their place of work and while they were on duty, and right from their clothes to haircut and their overall conduct was designed to be professional, and officers of all ranks, right from the very top to the bottom, were seen to be voluntarily following this code. But over the last couple of decades, these codes have been set aside, and especially in investigative agencies, casual clothing had become the norm. According to the writer, such casual conduct affects the image of the force and as well as projects the force as an inefficient and non-professional force. On similar lines, recently the DGP of Bihar Police had issued two very important instructions. One, all police personnel were prohibited from using their mobile phones while on duty, except in exceptional cases as it was affecting the image of the force. Because while on duty, You can't have police officers to be browsing their mobile phones or to be seen engaging in unnecessary personal chats. Such unprofessional behavior while on duty, while donning the uniform, directly affects the image and the efficiency of the force. Similarly, a few years back, another instruction was issued by the DGP of Bihar Police, which ordered all personnel to stop displaying any religious symbols while in uniform. See, Indian police and security forces are designed to be secular inherently, and except for Sikh officers, no one else can display their religious symbols. But it was noted that within Bihar police, certain officers were wearing tilaks and other religious symbols while donning the uniform, which was clearly unprofessional conduct on the part of the officers. To set this record straight, the DGP himself had to intervene and issue such orders banning the usage of mobile phones and as well as reminding the officers to not display any religious symbols or inclination while in uniform. The writer says that such orders become necessary when the force and the officers, including the chain of command, is not seen to be following these basic norms of etiquette, decorum, and discipline. The writer points out that such etiquette has to be inculcated during training itself. Because instead of micromanaging the officers, then all the officers can be self motivated. And instead of enforcing these conduct rules to separate orders and instructions, senior officers in the higher levels of the hierarchy, they need to set an example and ensure that their subordinates follow the same conduct. It is on same lines that police forces have opposed the usage of khaki uniform for civil defense volunteers. Because the khaki uniform is the exclusive preserve of security forces, and the chances are high that civil defense volunteers and even miscreants might start misusing the uniform to project themselves as police officers or as security officers. The writer reiterates the point that when police and security officials, when they wear formal clothing and when they conduct themselves in a professional manner, that is when they command respect, thereby enhancing their own image and as well as the image of the force, which in turn directly translates to increased efficiency and professionalism within the force. On similar lines, it's also very important for police and security officials to be seen to be fit and healthy, and this is where he appreciates the fitness policy of the Central Armed Police Forces, which was introduced through the 1990s. Within the Central Armed Police Forces under the Ministry of Home Affairs, very strict standards of medical fitness has been prescribed, which has to be maintained by all officers. That is the reason why when you come across Central Armed Police Forces, be it officers of the BSF, the CISF, CRPF, etc., you'll find them to be fitter and they appear to be more professional and healthier as compared to your regular state police forces. Because within CAPFs, a mandatory annual medical examination has been introduced from the 1990s, and this fitness performance is directly linked to their promotions. So this acts as an incentive for all officers in the chain of command to be self-motivated to remain fit and healthy throughout their service, because any medical deficiency found during these examinations will result in denial of promotions to them. The writer calls for similar medical examinations to be made mandatory for state police forces as well, and he calls upon the central and the state governments to modify the conduct rules to enforce these norms of etiquette, decorum, and discipline in all government departments to raise their image and as well as to make them more professional. Now let's look at a few small articles from page number 8. According to this article, a team of officers from the Indian Navy have been sent to the United States for receiving training to fly the MH-60R helicopters that the Indian Navy is procuring from the United States. See, last year, India signed a landmark deal with the United States to procure 24 MH-60R helicopters, which are built by the American defense manufacturer Lockheed Martin. The MH-60R helicopters are multi-role helicopters primarily used for anti-submarine warfare and as well as for surveillance and patrolling. And India is procuring 24 of them from the United States under the Buy Global category of its defense procurement policy. 3 of these helicopters will be delivered next month, which will be used in the United States itself for training the pilots of the Indian Navy. And beginning from June next year, the first batch of these helicopters will start arriving in India. This procurement from the United States is set to plug a critical gap for the Indian Navy as it has been facing an acute shortage of helicopters on its frontline warships. And hence, apart from this deal, India is also looking to procure around 111 light naval utility helicopters, along with another 123 multi-role helicopters. Now let's look at the next article. Construction work has begun on the second stealth frigate of the Krivak class, which is based on technology that India is procuring from Russia. See, earlier, India had procured 6 Krivak class frigates from Russia, which have been inducted into the Indian Navy under the Talwar class and the Tegh class. Then in 2016, India signed a follow-up order through an intergovernmental agreement with Russia, under which 4 more stealth frigates under the Krivak class would be supplied to India. Out of these 4 ships, 2 would be built in Russia and directly transferred to India, and the remaining 2 would be built domestically in India through transfer of technology. For this purpose, Goa Shipyard Limited has been chosen as a strategic partner, and the construction of the first ship under this class began at the start of this year, and yesterday the keel has been laid for the second frigate as well, marking a major milestone in the construction of these ships. The Krivak class frigates, they come equipped with stealth technology, and once they are inducted into the Talwar and Tegh class of ships, it will be armed with the BrahMos cruise missiles. Next, coming to the last article, there has been a report that the Lakshadweep administration, which has come under a lot of criticism due to its controversial policies, has been looking to shift its legal jurisdiction, which currently lies with the Kerala High Court, to the Karnataka High Court. In the last few weeks, we have discussed the controversial development plans and policies that have been brought out by the Lakshadweep administration. As a result, several petitions have been filed at the Kerala High Court against these proposed plans, as the Kerala High Court has been provided with jurisdiction over Lakshadweep as well. This report has alleged that the Lakshadweep administration is trying to escape scrutiny of the Kerala High Court by trying to shift its legal jurisdiction to the Karnataka High Court. But however, the Lakshadweep administration has denied these reports as just rumors and false news, because the powers to shift the jurisdiction of a High Court rests only with the Parliament, and only through an act of the Parliament can the jurisdiction of a High Court can be changed or modified. Now let's look at the mains practice questions. The first question: evaluate the centre's latest move to engage with the political leadership in Kashmir. The second question: Russia's uncritical advocacy of China's global vision is what seems to be leaving India quite confounded. Discuss keeping Indian interests in mind. Kindly write an answer to these questions and post your answers in the comment section below. So this concludes our discussion for today. Thanks for watching.